Is that fair to say that you think Justin Fields, you get a guy like Kyle Shanahan, the sky's the limit?
I do. I think with his speed, he's going to run in the 4.4 range, and his passion for the game. He loves the game of football. He studies the game hard. I think all those things could lead to Justin Fields in the right environment. That's the key for a lot of these guys. And we always forget, it always goes back, and you know this, it always goes back to the scouts and the evaluators. How about the coaches or the system? And nobody ever talks about that enough. They always say, well, the coach helped them. But how about the coaches can be a detriment at times, not going to the right situation, not having stability or continuity. So it's always on the scouts. They blew it. They didn't get it right. Well, sometimes these quarterbacks would have been somewhere else instead of where they went. I always say, what would Dan Marino's career look like if he had gone to the Detroit Lions instead of fullback James Jones, who they took? He ends up going to Don Shula and the Miami Dolphins at the end of the first round. What would have happened? Because I can tell you this, Paxton Lynch almost was a Kansas City Chief. They tried to move up to get Paxton Lynch, and next year they got Patrick Mahomes. Well, guess what? If they would have gotten Paxton Lynch, they wouldn't have drafted Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes wouldn't have been a Chief. So how history changes everything. I always say, what would Nick Saban's career have been in Miami had he signed Drew Brees instead of Dante Culpepper and brought in Culpepper? So, Brees probably would have been winning, and maybe Nick Saban would have never been at Alabama. So history could have been rewritten if certain things could have happened. And certainly with some of these quarterbacks over the years, had they gone to the right situation, they might have had a better opportunity. And some of these kids that hit well maybe went to the perfect spot. So that's what you hope with Shanahan. That if you're a quarterback going to Kyle Shanahan, you feel like you got if you're going to be good, that's a pretty good place to say, I got my best opportunity for success.
All right, that was Mel Kiper Jr. on Shanahan, Justin Fields, and the most underappreciated people in America, NFL scouts, John.
Yeah, I know. I love it. Yeah.
I'm Guy. That's John. And this is our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it and give this video a like.
Yeah, full Mel Kiper interview down below in the description.
Okay, so a lot there.
He's right. I mean, give him his due, Guy. He's right. And it's always these. I saw a Football Scoop article today. College wide receiver coaches are making $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. I got buddies working a decade in the league, pounding the pavement, making $90,000, $100,000. What's going on here, Guy? We have pay discrepancies.
All they have to show for it is a Honda Accord with the empty Copenhagen tins in the back seat.
I know, and a bunch of
Malibu
polos with their team logo hanging on it. Yeah, it'd be like a Ford Fusion. You'd want a good gas mileage.
Yeah, there's just nothing but hangers all over
Tesla.
the back seat.
Tesla doesn't make any sense. It'd run out of juice, right?
Yeah, plus teams wouldn't get it for you.
No, yeah, that's true.
Okay, so Fields, part of the reason he believes, and you and I have talked about this, part of the reason he likes Justin Fields to the Niners, it sounds like, is part of the reason he would like a lot of guys to the Niners because he believes in Kyle Shanahan. Because he thinks if a quarterback goes to Kyle Shanahan, he has a better chance to succeed. And it kind of brings the anticipatory scouting together, because what he's saying is if I'm scouting for Kyle Shanahan, I'm going, this player, Kyle, this is a guy that you will like. This is a guy that you can make flourish.
Well, this is why I put the three of them in a clump together. Now, I'm not saying they parallel their games together. I'm just talking about physical tools, ceiling, sky high. Josh Allen, he was a big project. Took him a couple years, but as Mel told us in the interview, his second year, and I remember talking to Sean McDermott at the Combine, second year was solid. It wasn't, his deep ball accuracy wasn't great, but he improved dramatically short and intermediate. Then what'd they do his third year? Got Diggs, rest is history. He was like a legitimate MVP candidate this year, right? Herbert was just this raw tool guy, but it was the personality. But I don't think anyone thought his tools were going to translate like that. And it was like, holy moly. And it translates. And both of those guys immediately are viewed as two of the most toolsy players in the league at quarterback, right? Like you would just say Justin Herbert, Josh Allen have more tools than like Deshaun Watson, than Russell Wilson. Like they have elite tools. Even like older Aaron Rodgers still's got it, but he's not what he was when he was like 28, right? That's what those guys are, just Mahomes and then like those two. Fields, I don't know if quite is that elite tools, but he's kind of behind them of just, I think his ceiling's really high, but he needs some work and you need to mold him. And it's like, well, the scouts always say, well, fucking let's coach him up. You guys are making all this money. I say it all the time. Guy, these coaches, I'm not talking shit about Kyle or whatever because I think he does it, but coaches all over the league. There's not an offensive coordinator in the league that does not make seven figures. There's not a quarterback coach in the league that probably makes less than $700,000. You're paying these guys so much money and they spend so much time in their little, probably some are little, some are big offices in the dark, watching film and knowing the offense. Like, you need a coach. It's why Andy's so great. It's why Sean Payton's so great. They can coach. And I just Kyle can, but I think he's limited himself over the years with like lower ceiling guys. And I think now is the time to just take a higher ceiling guy and mold. He did a pretty good job with Jimmy, who had some tools, but he just has some limitations. Like Jimmy is not like C.J. Beathard, right? He has a much higher ceiling than that. He's much more physically gifted, but it's relative to the rest of the league. He's not like, I wouldn't even say he's like not as gifted as like Dak. His gifts aren't great. They just need to get it out with really high ceiling.
It's like I think you and I do. We talk about what they have to prove or player evaluation. I don't have many doubts about Kyle Shanahan, the coach. I think I'm probably, I think you're with me, but I'm definitely on the high end, on a pretty extreme side of belief in Kyle Shanahan as a coach. But it's not, I think people like him. Clearly. I'm not pretending like I'm on some island. But it does feel like we talk about him as if he's one of the elite race car drivers in the sport, and like somehow, for whatever reason, insists on driving a car that, it doesn't go as fast because he likes the control around turns or something. I don't know NASCAR enough to make the analogy fully, but that's kind of what we say about him, right? It's like, hey, man, let's see you now in a car that is brand new, that has all the newest stuff in it, that goes just as fast as anybody else's, and is a little harder to control. But those are the cars that win consistently, or those cars. So let's go for broke here. Instead of like a bunch of top 5 finishes in some races, let's see if we can win one. Let's see if we can win the big one. I think that's, again, that analogy probably doesn't work perfectly, but I think that's kind of what we're saying. And I'm with you, because I think with quarterbacks especially, we talk in, extremes. Did you nail the pick or was it a bust? Because after 4 years or 5 years, you're in the Cowboys situation where he better be one of the two. Otherwise, you're paying a guy $40 million who's not a carrier. And we'd love to see Kyle, get away from the guys. Now, he made Matt Ryan, they paid him like a carrier. They got to the Super Bowl. They could have won a Super Bowl with him, but they didn't.
It wasn't Matt Ryan's fault.
No, I'm not blaming Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, the game has also changed since Matt Ryan's prime, right?
For sure.
But Matt Ryan he was a number one. I think you're not going to get any argument. Matt Ryan hit. They drafted him number 1, number 2 overall, and they nailed the pick.
It might have been 3 or something. But yeah.
They nailed the pick, right? Yeah. Nailed the pick.
It's arguably the best player in the history of their franchise, right?
It wasn't his pick, but they nailed that pick. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's what I think about when we talk about Kyle. Like his comp, we do it with players all the time. Like who's Brandon Ayuk like? Maybe he can be like, this player. With Kyle, it's Kyle and McVay. They are each other's comp, right? Young guys, offensive dynamic guys, hired the same year. They work together. They now just worked out. They coach in the same division. They've coached against each other 8 times. We talk about Kyle and McVay like they're equals. They both went to a Super Bowl and lost. The difference is Sean McVay is 43-21 in 4 years. Kyle is 29-35. And here's another reality. This year, even if you go, well, John, he inherited a better team. Actually, the Rams sucked when he inherited them. They did have more talent on the roster for sure than the Niners. But I think the last couple years showed like McVay's ceiling was just a lot higher with his team. And unlike the thing that Kyle does that McVay doesn't, is Kyle is the boss of the organization. Sean, Demoff has a lot of juice. Les has a lot of juice. Nothing happens. Let me repeat. Absolutely nothing happens in the 49ers building without Kyle signing off on it. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. And this year, for example, McVay went, I can't do this anymore. After they had won a playoff game, they had finished 10-6. They were right there to win the division. They go to Seattle, which, as we know, out on the West Coast, all these division games, I can't imagine what it would be like for a Kyle Seattle game in the playoffs. Like, that's a big deal. Even Corona, empty place. Like, that's a big deal. Rams, Seattle, first round. Kicked his ass. And obviously, when the season ends, this guy's not good enough. And what did they do? They kind of put their nuts on the table and took a pretty crazy swing, unloaded Goff, and got Stafford, which we had been talking like the Niners are going to get Stafford, the Niners are going to get Stafford. No, the Rams got him. So now it's like, well, their team is stacked. So he's 43-21. I think them and the Bucs are, and we'll see what happens like with the Packers offseason. The Saints don't have a quarterback. They're easily one of the best teams in the NFC. If the Rams were to win the NFC and get to the Super Bowl, it's very believable as we sit here right now in March. That's who the Niners are like. That's his who he's going up against. And he's got Matt Stafford, who, while he feels like he's 40, he's actually only like 33. Their team is stacked. Like, this is Kyle's part of putting your nuts on the table isn't just because they need to be aggressive. Part of it's just the fucking division. And your rival is just way better than you. Like, your division does matter in football, right? You can say you don't dictate off what other teams do in the league, for sure. But teams in your division, like, you're trying to keep up with the Rams. You're trying to be what they've become, consistently good.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I don't think you can allow that to dictate to a too great of a degree, but it absolutely, yeah.
But part of it, that's why they're going to keep winning, right? That's the formula to win. You need to see high-end players, specifically at quarterback.
Yeah, the other part of it is that this is already part of the Niners story is not drafting Deshaun and not drafting Mahomes. So if you don't draft a high-end guy this year and they turn out to be good, it's another part of the story. If your alternative guy, now, I mean, someone would argue, well, Darnold's got tools, so do that. Okay, you and I don't love him, but it's kind of the same idea. Although
one thing I've tried to make a personal philosophy just in life, because I think it's human nature to hold on to things in the past, is not to worry about things 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 2 years ago. Like, the present is the present. We're moving forward. That is part of their story. That's over. Part of the Rams story was like overpaying Goff, and they pivoted. Like, I'd say the great part about the NFL is your story doesn't have to define you. Like, make a move.
No.
Do something.
Of course
not. I know what you're saying.
I'm just
that
saying
comes up a lot.
This is eventually all these things add up, and at some point it comes time for a contract extension or a firing, and these are all parts of it. Well, and I don't think we're close to that now. I'm just saying this is part of it.
But I'm giving the Rams credit. Like, part of their story was paying Gurley way too early. Whatever.
No, there's no doubt. And I shouldn't even say it's part of the firing, the future. I'm just, if they're going to win a Super Bowl, because they've been to one, so that's the next. If they're going to consistently be a playoff team, if they're going to win the division, what's going to stop them, or what's going to help them from getting there?
The difference, though, is their team is just dramatically not as good as that team, because it was just like peak of the money with the guys. Their defensive line was loaded. Richard Sherman was an All-Pro, he was a Hall of Famer, was on their team. It's like it's going to be hard to duplicate the talent
for sure
that they had on that team moving forward.
I just know they need a quarterback, John, if they're going to be good. Let's just use the word good. If they're going to be really good, be a playoff team.
That's my point. That team was able to get to a Super Bowl with a quarterback that was probably like 15th in the league, between 15 and 10 that year on a given week, but definitely not like a top 10 quarterback. That's not the case anymore, because their team is not going to be that good. So they're going to need a guy with a high-end skill set. And I think the Rams, that's why I keep using the Rams analogy, they realize we can't maintain the depth of our roster, so we can't get to the Super Bowl with a 6. Now, we're not going to be able to acquire a 10, right? We're not going to get Aaron Rodgers, even though I think the Rams called. But if we can get an 8 in Stafford or an 8.5, like, that might be the difference. To me, the Niners, same deal. Made the Super Bowl with a 6. If they rolled back a 6 this year, even Jimmy Garoppolo, they might get to 9-8 or whatever the record would be, right? The 17 games. But they ain't going 13-3 because their team's just not as good. And remember, early in that season, their defense, a couple games, that's just not going to be the case. Now, if you give them a higher-end quarterback, maybe that's the difference of getting to 11, 12 wins. And it might, with a rookie, it's a little complicated because it might not happen, or whether they think Darnold's upside's better. But I think the point of what Mel's saying is like, you are not going to say, if you do acquire a guy that's a big swing. No, like with Stafford to the Rams, no one's going to say, well, I don't know if they have the infrastructure to coach him.
Right.
The number one thing you'd say is like, God, is that guy? If Sam Darnold is traded to the Niners tomorrow, next week, and a month, the first thing everyone's going to say is he should thank his lucky stars. He got a second reprieve, and it's to Kyle Shanahan.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Because I think that's what everyone said about Matt Stafford. Like, Matt Stafford's pretty lucky he ends up around Sean now, right?
Right. We'll say if it's gonna work, this is where if Darnold's got it in him, this is where he can prove it. If it doesn't work here, if it doesn't work in a year or two, and Darnold's on his way to another team, I think people will say, well, it didn't work with Kyle Shanahan. Why will it work with somebody else?
Because the one thing no one would say about Jimmy is he hasn't had the best coaching, right? From the jump.
Yeah, you're talking about first Belichick and Brady and Josh McDaniels, and then, yeah, absolutely.
It's like, who's he dated? Well, Cindy Crawford, and then he went to Tyra Banks to Giselle. It's the cream of the crop for Jimmy. No one will ever be like, well, I think he wasn't quite getting the message probably there. No, yeah, that ain't the case, which is the Sam Darnold, that is the case, right? Or even I think with college guys, it's like, well, they didn't have the time, with Justin Fields. They're just trying to win a national championship. They only have 20 hours a week. It's just different.